Hello, and welcome to the Ostrom Workshop and this concise introduction to the Bloomington School of Political Economy. My name is Dan Cole. I'm an affiliated faculty member at the workshop, as well as a professor of law and of public and environmental affairs here at Indiana University, Bloomington. This video is one in a series produced by the Ostrom Workshop to provide clear and concise introductions to specific aspects of its various research programs, rooted in theories and approaches first developed by the workshop's founders, Vincent and Eleanor Ostrom. Since its founding in 1973, the Ostrom Workshop has contributed a great deal to the way we understand and approach collective action problems, including both social and combined social ecological problems. My topic today, the Bloomington School, is an umbrella label covering all of the distinctive foundational ideas and attributes that have informed workshop research programs since the founding back in 1973. The label Bloomington School was first used in a 1988 article by University of Oregon political scientist William Mitchell. Mitchell was describing three dominant schools of thought in public choice theory, also known as social choice theory, which is a prominent theory of positive political economy. Generally speaking, the twin goals of public or social choice theory are to understand political behavior, utilizing mainly principles of microeconomics, and to comprehend the constitutional structure of economic systems. The three schools Mitchell identified were: one, the Virginia School, associated with James Buchanan and Gordon Tullock; two, the Rochester School, led by William Riker; and three, the Bloomington School, created by the Ostroms here at Indiana University in Bloomington. The primary distinguishing feature of the Bloomington School, according to Mitchell, is its empirical, problem-focused approach to institutional analysis, associated primarily with Eleanor Ostrom, combined with Vincent Ostrom's more philosophical understanding of constitutional social orders. However, Mitchell neglected other equally significant differences that set the Bloomington School apart from others. The Bloomington School rests on a dozen, as I count them, distinctive foundational ideas relating to political theory, policymaking, and public administration in a wide variety of social, political, and environmental contexts. I've attempted to put them in some semblance of logical order, which should not be interpreted as an order of importance. First, the Bloomington School starts with the individual as the primary unit of analysis. This methodological individualism, which it shares with other schools of public choice, is distinguished, often simplistically, from social constructivism, which in its strict form denies that individuals have agency, that is, the power to affect the basic circumstances of their own lives. Second, while the other schools of public choice theory also subscribe to methodological individualism, the Bloomington School is far more optimistic about the capabilities of ordinary citizens to bring about change. That optimism is warranted by empirical findings from workshop research programs, but it's also premised on the Bloomington School's more realistic treatment of individual actors. Other schools of public choice presume that people are always perfectly rational and motivated only by material self-interest. The Bloomington School, by contrast, treats individuals as boundedly rational and motivated not only by economic incentives, but also by personal ethics, ideological commitments, conventions, habits, customs, biases, and concern for the well-being of others, including people they might not even know. Third, individuals may also be motivated to engage in productive public service. Vincent Ostrom referred to these people as public entrepreneurs. Not everyone who participates in governance is a rent seeker, as the Virginia school supposes. Public entrepreneurs are motivated to serve societal needs as they see them, including provision of public goods that markets simply do not supply. And contrary to Buchanan and Tulloch, Vincent Ostrom did not venerate the market as an ideal type. For him, ideal types are just that, ideal, as in not real. They don't exist in the world. Vincent would have agreed with Ronald Coase's assertion that all sets of governance institutions, including state institutions and market institutions, are subject to failure. Consequently, what we require is a carefully constructed comparative institutional analysis, not of existing institutions against ideal types, but against other realistic alternatives. It's not that Vincent denied the value of private enterprise. He had great respect for private entrepreneurs, but he acknowledged the importance of public service enterprises led by people he referred to as artisans, endeavoring to create institutions that provide public services through formal governmental or other means. And after all, the founders of the American Republic were not simple market actors engaged in a contest for spoils, though there certainly was some of that, but they were public entrepreneurs endeavoring to create, in their own words, a more perfect union. Vincent himself served as a public entrepreneur on more than one occasion, including as advisor to the Alaska Constitutional Convention. Fourth, although the Bloomington School rejects strict social constructivism, it recognizes that humans live in rule-ordered societies. The rules in use, that is, existing institutional structures, affect our attitudes, beliefs, and preferences, incentives, strategies, and choices, our ability to engage in collective action, to resolve common problems, and of course, our well-being. This recognition is, to a greater or lesser extent, common to all schools of public or social choice, but the Bloomington School, particularly Vincent Ostrom's work, focuses more on the constitutional level of choice, where meta rules are selected that affect the choice of policies, as well as the rules in use at the operational level of day-to-day interactions. Fifth, in contrast to the Virginia School of Buchanan and Tulloch, the Bloomington School is deeply empirical. Its basic approach to problem solving is abductive rather than deductive or inductive. The abductive approach starts with the identification of some problem under existing theory, some problem to solve. Problem selection is exogenous to the analysis and usually put in the form of a research question. Once framed, the problem is diagnosed by comprehensive and detailed analysis of its institutional structure using one of the workshop's analytical frameworks, to which I will introduce you shortly. This institutional analysis is designed to yield testable hypotheses about potential institutional solutions to whatever problem is identified. Sixth, as part of its commitment to empiricism, Bloomington School scholars embrace the complexity and diversity of social dilemmas and potential solutions. Specific problems may, to some extent, be decomposable into less complex elements, but no simple one-size-fits-all solutions, that is, no panaceas, exist. This differentiates the Bloomington School from other political economic theories that recommend as universal first best solutions either more individual private property or total state control of common pool resources regardless of circumstances and actual consequences. From a Bloomington School perspective, the market versus the state dichotomy for resolving collective action problems is simplistic because it neglects hybrid solutions. The market and the state are both abstract and rarely well-defined descriptors for various sets of institutions. Seventh, a fundamental contribution of the Bloomington School and a starting point for its most famous research program is the formal definition of a distinctive category of goods that are neither public, private, nor club goods. They are common pool resources, CPRs, which some economists refer to less helpfully as impure, subtractable, or congestible public goods. In fact, a public good cannot, by definition, be subtractable or congestible. A public good is defined by the twin characteristics of non-rivalrousness in consumption, that is, no one's use depletes the amount of the good available to others, and non-excludability, which means that the characteristics of the resource make it too costly to parcelize and privatize. A naturally existing public good, an example would be solar radiation, without which life on Earth would be impossible. For an example of an artifactual public good, a public good that humans must create, consider standard weights and measures. Once created, they're available for anyone and everyone to use without depleting the good in any way. No one can be excluded from using them. In fact, exclusion would defeat the purpose of standard weights and measures. A common pool resource, as defined by the Ostroms, shares with public goods the characteristics of non-excludability, or at least high costs of exclusion, but differs in that consumption of the resource is rivalrous, so that units consumed by one person deplete the overall stock of units of the good available to others. All environmental media, airsheds, watersheds, land share these characteristics, as do many of the resources or goods that inhabit these media, including forests, fish, fresh water, oil and gas. The Ostrom's definition of common pool resources gave rise to a large part of the Ostrom's agenda for the study of institutions, because CPRs, in contrast to public goods, require institutional governance to prevent their deterioration and destruction, described by the biologist Garrett Hardin as the tragedy of the commons. At the same time, however, the high cost of exclusion associated with common pool resources means that they're less susceptible than private goods or club goods to common forms of private ownership. Around the world, workshop scholars have observed a vast diversity of successful as well as unsuccessful institutional solutions for prevention of commons tragedies. Eighth, the Bloomington School is devoted to an interdisciplinary, multi-methods approach to problem solving, actively seeking to involve scholars from diverse disciplines in the knowledge that complex problems in the real world are highly unlikely to be completely understood using the theories and tools of a single academic discipline. In addition to disciplinary diversity, the Bloomington School has fostered a great geographical diversity of scholars from every continent save Antarctica. They participate in one or another of the research programs, and many of those scholars spend some time in the Ostrom workshop as visiting scholars. Thus, while the workshop might not be as famous or infamous as other schools of public choice, it probably has a significantly larger global presence. Ninth, to facilitate interdisciplinary understanding and cooperation, the Ostroms and their colleagues worked very hard to develop a common set of conceptual definitions, as well as a grammar of institutions based on deontic logic. The institutional grammar focuses on actions that, under existing rules, individuals are allowed, required, or prohibited from taking, and the consequences of rule violations. 10th, Elinor Ostrom and colleagues developed two famous analytical frameworks to which I alluded a short time ago. The Institutional Analysis and Development Framework, known as the IAD framework, and the Social Ecological Systems, or SES framework, to facilitate interdisciplinary cooperation by establishing a common conceptual and relational apparatus for scholars from various disciplines to use. By using one of the analytical frameworks, the work of an anthropologist can be easily understood by an economist or a geographer, and all their studies can be commonly coded for purposes of quantitative analysis. The IAD and SES frameworks are uniquely associated with the workshop and are widely used by scholars, including scholars who are not in the workshop, from diverse disciplines. Now, while the frameworks are designed primarily for diagnostic purposes to yield high-quality hypotheses, the frameworks sometimes allow prediction of likely outcomes of specific institutional changes in well-studied, well-understood circumstances. Thanks to the frameworks, databases of useful, commonly coded case studies, such as the International Forestry Resources and Institutions Database, known as the IFRI database, are growing ever larger and yielding interesting quantitative assessments. 11th, Elinor Ostrom's meta-analysis of case studies in her celebrated book Governing the Commons yielded an influential set of hypotheses known as the design principles. These include the characteristics commonly found among successful common property systems she studied, but not in failed systems. They've proven quite useful for evaluating problematic common property systems and for predicting whether a particular system under study is likely to prove sustainable. The more a system displays the attributes of the design principles in the aggregate, the more likely it is to survive. Importantly, and contrary to the understanding of some scholars, Elinor Ostrom did not intend the design principles to serve as a blueprint or a recipe for artificially constructing a successful common property regime to govern some common pool resource. 12th, and last but not least, the Bloomington School retains an empirically well-grounded belief in the value of polycentric governance. In fact, most of Elinor Ostrom's time during the first decade of the workshop's existence was occupied with carefully constructed empirical studies to test theories of polycentric governance that Vincent Ostrom began elaborating in the early 1960s. At that time, a consolidationist movement had taken hold among political scientists and public administration scholars who presumed ever-increasing economies of scale in provision of public services. This movement led to smaller police departments being folded into larger metropolitan police departments, and small rural schools were abandoned as students were bused into larger schools in consolidated school districts. Vincent's conception of polycentric governance challenged the presumption of ever-increasing returns to scale by emphasizing performance advantages of local governance units, including police departments and schools. Elinor and colleagues in the workshop structured studies of various sized police departments. These studies were carried out in several cities, and they provided empirical support to Vincent's theories of polycentric governance. And they apply not only to local governance. Indeed, Vincent Ostrom wrote about American federalism as a large-scale example of polycentric governance. The chief advantages of polycentric governance, premised on an implicit notion of subsidiarity, is that individuals tend to have greater trust in institutions and organizations located closer to them. Plus, a multiplicity of substantially independent, though possibly interdependent governance units provides greater opportunities for policy experiments from which lessons can be learned about what policies work better than others for solving some kind of collection action problem in some specific context. While the commitment to polycentric governance is a strong default position for Bloomington School scholars, it is not an article of faith. The Ostroms, especially Vincent, always stressed the provisional nature of all theories, which must be subject to revision or even elimination in light of new data. This fundamental commitment to the scientific method extends even to theories of polycentric governance, the extent and desirability of which Vincent always maintained was an empirical question. In this respect, the Bloomington School's approach to political economic theory is less ideologically determined or rigid than the approaches of other schools of public choice, particularly the Virginia School. That's the list. Now, many of the central ideas of the Bloomington School I've just described will be addressed individually and in greater depth and at greater length in other programs in this series. I hope this program has whetted your appetite to learn more about them. At the very least, I hope this introduction to the Bloomington School has helped you gain a better understanding of what that label means. Thanks for tuning in, and so long from the Ostrom Workshop.